poor rancher for years, until he buys an Apache widow who changes his life. John Miller woke up before the sun, as he had done for more than 20 years. The ranch was quiet except for the soft lowing of the cattle and the distant call of a lone hawk circling in the sky. He rubbed his tired eyes and stepped out of the small wooden cabin he called home. The air was crisp, and the smell of dry earth mixed with hay filled his nose. Every morning, this routine reminded him of how much he depended on the land, even though the land had not always been kind to him. John's ranch was small, just a few hundred acres of dusty Arizona land, far from any town or neighbor. For years, he had worked tirelessly to keep it running. He remembered when he first inherited it from his father, a strong, quiet man who had loved the land with every fiber of his being. John had dreams of a successful ranch full of healthy cattle, strong fences, and wide fields of grass. But life had not gone the way he had imagined. Droughts had come and gone, stealing much of his feed and leaving him struggling to keep his cattle alive. Markets had shifted, and the prices he received for his livestock were never enough to cover the bills. Despite all of this, John refused to give up. He had always been a man who believed in hard work. Every day he rose before sunrise to begin his chores. He checked the fences, mended broken gates, carried water to the thirsty animals, and fed each cow by hand if needed. The work was exhausting, and it often left his back aching and his hands blistered. But he could not imagine doing anything else. The ranch was more than a job. It was a part of him, a part of his family's legacy. Even though John lived alone now, he had not always been alone. His wife, Mary, had passed away many years ago, leaving him with a deep emptiness that never seemed to fade. He rarely spoke of her to anyone, but her absence was felt in every corner of the cabin and every quiet moment on the ranch. Her laughter no longer echoed through the halls, and her gentle hands no longer helped with the chores. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit on the porch and watch the stars, imagining her sitting beside him, sharing the silence. Those nights were the hardest, for the loneliness pressed heavily on his chest, reminding him that life could be both beautiful and cruel at the same time. The neighbors often whispered about him. Some called him unlucky. Others said he had poor judgment. They did not understand the daily struggles he faced or the long hours he spent trying to make the ranch survive. Occasionally, a visitor would stop by, bringing news of new techniques or tools, and John would listen politely, but he rarely had the money to make changes. Every cent he earned went directly back into keeping the ranch alive. Even so, he held on to hope, small though it was, that one day the land would reward his efforts. John had a simple life, but it was not without small joys. He loved the early morning light, when the sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and pink. He loved watching his cattle roam the fields, their steady movements calming him after long hours of work. He enjoyed listening to the wind as it passed through the dry grass, bringing with it the faint scent of distant wildflowers. These moments reminded him that there was beauty in the world, even when life seemed harsh and unforgiving. Yet, John's financial struggles weighed heavily on him. He often went to bed worrying about bills he could not pay and feed he could not buy. The bank had been patient, but he knew their patience had limits. Every month he counted every coin, planning how to stretch it just a little further. He even tried small side jobs, repairing neighbors' fences or helping in town during harvest season. But it was never enough. Each setback seemed to pile upon the last, creating a mountain of worry that never seemed to shrink. Despite the hardships, John never lost his sense of responsibility. The animals depended on him, and he could not let them down. He remembered one summer when the drought was particularly severe. The ground was cracked, and the sun burned fiercely. leaving little grass for the cattle to eat. Many ranchers in the area had sold their herds, but John refused. He carried water to each animal, carefully rationing it, and even used what little feed he had to ensure none of his cattle went hungry. Those long days left him exhausted, but he never regretted his efforts. On some days he would walk through the fields, examining the fences and checking the water troughs. He would speak quietly to himself, planning the next steps or reminding himself of what needed to be done. Occasionally, he would talk to the cattle, giving them names and treating them as companions rather than just animals. It gave him comfort, a sense that he was not completely alone. Though the work was hard, it kept him moving forward, and it reminded him that perseverance, even in the face of adversity, had value. John's life was full of quiet moments and hard work, but it was also full of hope, however faint it might have been. He believed that if he kept going, if he continued to care for the land and the animals, something good might happen. Perhaps a rainstorm would come at just the right time, or a buyer would appear for his cattle at a fair price. These small possibilities kept him moving, giving him reason to rise each morning, even when his body ached and his spirit felt heavy. Every day, John reminded himself that life on the ranch was not easy, but it was honest. He did not cheat, he did not take shortcuts, and he did not give up. These principles had been instilled in him by his father and reinforced through years of struggle. And though the path was difficult, he knew that he could endure. After all, he had survived droughts, fires, and financial hardship. He had faced loss and loneliness, yet he continued to rise with the sun, tending to his cattle and his land, determined to make the best of what he had. Even as the world around him seemed to move forward and leave him behind, John found comfort in the steady rhythm of ranch life. The animals, the fences, and the open sky were constants in a world that often seemed uncertain and unfair. He took pride in his work, knowing that every fence he mended, every drop of water he carried, and every animal he cared for was a small victory in itself. And so life continued. Each day brought new challenges, but John met them as he always had, with quiet determination, patience, and hope. Though he had struggled for years and the future often seemed uncertain, he held on to the belief that one day something remarkable might change his life. Little did he know, that day was closer than he imagined, waiting to arrive in a form he could never have expected. John Miller had always visited the small town at the edge of his property, but mostly out of necessity. Supplies, tools, feed, and the occasional mail. These trips were practical, brief, and unexciting. He preferred the quiet of his ranch, the smell of the earth, and the company of his cattle. Yet, on this particular morning, something pushed him to take a longer route into town. The market had a small livestock auction that day, and though he had little money to spare, curiosity nudged him forward. Maybe, he thought, he could find something useful, or perhaps just a reminder that life had more to offer than struggle. The auction yard was alive with noise. Horses whinnied, cows loud, and people shouted over one another, making deals that seemed impossible to follow. John moved slowly through the pens, his eyes scanning the animals. Most of them looked ordinary, well-fed, obedient, and yet lacking the spark he had learned to value in a working animal. He had seen enough to know the difference. Some animals carried themselves with pride, intelligence, or raw energy that could change the rhythm of a ranch if guided properly. Others were merely creatures of habit. Then, in a corner of the pen, he saw her, a dark mare, her coat glossy but marked with faint scars. She did not mingle with the other horses, but instead stood apart, her head high, nostrils flaring as she watched everyone with sharp, intelligent eyes. John stopped. He felt a strange pull in his chest. He had seen many horses in his life, but there was something about this one that made him pause, that made him feel as though she were more than a horse, as if she had a story of her own. She was an Apache widow, a rare breed known for its endurance, strength, and intelligence. Stories of her kind were whispered among ranchers. These horses were not easy to handle, often stubborn and wary, but once a bond was formed, they became unmatched companions and partners. John's heart raced. He had never seen one in person. Many ranchers in the area dismissed them as too wild, too unpredictable. But in her eyes, he saw something he could not explain, an understanding, almost human, as if she recognized him as someone who understood hardship. The auctioneer called out the bids. People were offering for other horses, their voices blending into a blur of noise. John's hand rested on the pen's gate, studying the mare. She did not shy away from the crowd, nor did she move toward it. She simply observed, calm but cautious, as though measuring every person present. John felt a strange certainty in that moment. He needed this horse. He didn't know how or why, only that she could change something in his life, just as he had once dreamed of changing the ranch with hard work. Bidding began, and John hesitated. The price climbed quickly, and he worried he might not afford her. The other bidders were experienced ranchers, confident and fast, yet John noticed they lacked patience, that spark of care. The mare's gaze remained on him, steady, and he felt a sudden courage. He raised his hand and offered an amount slightly above the last bid. The auctioneer nodded. Bids went back and forth, but John held firm. When the final gavel fell, the mare was his. The other ranchers murmured in surprise. "He spent what little he has on that one," one man muttered. "She's wild, he'll never tame her." John didn't respond. He simply opened the gate and walked toward the mare. She eyed him carefully, one ear swiveling as if listening to his heartbeat. He reached out slowly, letting her see that his hands were gentle. She didn't move away, but remained still, her gaze never leaving his. At that moment, John felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, except for the soft clatter of hooves against the ground. The mare walked calmly beside John's old truck, seeming to understand the journey. He thought about the work ahead, feeding her, training her, earning her trust. It would not be easy. The auctioneers were right. This horse was not for everyone. But John had survived droughts, financial hardship, and loss. He had patience, resilience, and a willingness to try again. Perhaps now, with her, the ranch could survive too. When they arrived at the ranch, the mare paused at the gate. She sniffed the air, lifted her hooves carefully, and then stepped onto the land that had been John's struggle and sanctuary for years. He guided her to the stable, a modest structure built with his own hands. She walked inside with quiet confidence, sensing the calm and the care he offered. John unloaded her feed and water, placing it carefully before her. She lowered her head to eat, her eyes still observing him. John smiled. This was the beginning, he thought. The first step in a journey neither of them fully understood yet. Over the next few days, John spent every moment with her. He cleaned her stall, brushed her coat, and spoke softly, sharing stories of the ranch, of the hardships they would face together. At first, she resisted. She pulled away, tossed her head, and tested boundaries. But John remained patient. He knew the trust was earned slowly, through consistency and care. Each day she allowed him closer, until he could run his hands along her neck without fear. Slowly, a bond began to form. At night, John would sit on the porch of his cabin, looking out at the mare as she rested in the stable. He could see her breath misting in the cool air, and he imagined her thoughts, as if she too were reflecting on the sudden turn in her life. He remembered the auctioneer's words: wild, unpredictable, impossible. But John had learned long ago that life's most valuable treasures often came wrapped in difficulty. Perhaps this horse, with her strength and intelligence, was exactly what he needed to lift the ranch and himself out of the long years of struggle. The following week brought small victories. The mare responded to his voice, followed him willingly, and even allowed him to lead her across the pasture without tension. It was clear she was smart, observant, and capable of great loyalty, but she demanded respect and understanding in return. John realized that this was not just a horse. She was a partner, a creature who could teach him patience, resilience, and trust in ways he had not imagined. Neighbors began to notice. Some came to see the rare Apache widow, commenting on her beauty and intelligence. Others whispered about John, saying he had finally found something worthwhile. But he paid little attention. His focus was on learning, connecting, and nurturing the trust between himself and the mare. He found that as he invested time and care in her, he also felt renewed energy for the ranch. Chores that had once felt burdensome became meaningful, and the land seemed a little less harsh. By the end of the month, the mare had transformed in subtle ways. Her once wary eyes now held warmth and curiosity. She followed John without hesitation, responded to his commands, and even seemed to anticipate his needs. In turn, John felt a growing sense of companionship he had not experienced in years. The loneliness that had settled in his cabin since Mary's passing began to lift, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of working alongside a creature who respected and trusted him. John knew the journey was only beginning. There would be challenges ahead: storms, tough terrain, and difficult cattle. But he also knew that with patience, effort, and the bond they were forming, they could face anything together. That realization filled him with hope and determination. For the first time in many years, he could imagine a future where the ranch not only survived but thrived, and where he would not face it alone. As the sun set over the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John watched the mare graze in the soft evening light. He felt a quiet joy, a sense that life had given him a second chance in a form he could not have predicted. Perhaps, he thought, some gifts arrive unexpectedly, not through ease, but through challenge and patience. And sometimes those gifts have eyes that understand you in ways no one else can. After the storm had passed, John Miller stood on the porch of his small cabin, looking out at the ranch. The sky was clear now, painted in soft shades of orange and pink by the setting sun. The air smelled fresh after the rain, and the earth seemed renewed. He could see the cattle, safe and calm, grazing in the pastures, and beside them the Apache widow moved gracefully, her coat glistening in the sunlight, her eyes bright and alert. For the first time in many years, John felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had tested everything he had learned with the mare. It had pushed him to the limits of patience, courage, and skill. But together they had faced the challenge and succeeded. That moment had changed everything. The ranch, once struggling under his care, had survived one of the harshest storms in decades. And John had survived too, not just physically, but emotionally. The bond he shared with the Apache widow had proven stronger than he had ever imagined. Word of the mare's bravery and intelligence spread quickly through the nearby towns. Neighbors came to see the horse that had helped save John's ranch. Some of them offered to buy her, and others offered to help with the ranch, impressed by what he had accomplished. But John did not sell. The mare was more than an animal to him. She was a partner, a friend, and a source of hope. She had transformed not just his ranch, but his life. With her help, the ranch began to thrive. John found new opportunities to sell his cattle, and the herd grew stronger and healthier than it had been in years. The fences, once weak and broken, were now sturdy, thanks to the mare's ability to guide him through the rough terrain and carry supplies. Water, which had often been scarce, was managed more efficiently as John learned to read the land and use every drop wisely. Slowly, the ranch was no longer a place of struggle, but a place of growth and success. More than the practical changes, John felt a personal transformation. The loneliness that had weighed on him for years was lifting. He had someone to care for, and someone who cared for him in return. The mare's presence filled his days with purpose and companionship. When he woke up early in the morning, he no longer felt burdened by the work ahead. Instead, he looked forward to the time he would spend with her, riding across the fields or checking on the cattle. Her gentle nature and intelligence brought him joy and comfort, reminding him that life could be beautiful even after years of hardship. John also began to think about the future differently. Before meeting the Apache widow, he had only imagined surviving from day to day. Now he dreamed of expanding the ranch, improving the land, and providing for the community. He considered taking in other struggling animals, knowing that he could care for them and give them a better life. The mare had shown him that challenges could be overcome and that hope was worth holding on to, even when the path seemed impossible. One day, as he walked through the pasture, the mare trotted beside him, nuzzling his shoulder affectionately. John smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart he had not known in years. He thought of the first time he had seen her at the auction, how wary and distant she had been. And now she was his companion, his partner, and a symbol of the resilience and trust that had brought him this far. He realized that the greatest rewards in life often came from patience, care, and belief in something better. The ranch began to attract attention from others who wanted to learn from John's methods. Local ranchers visited to see how he had managed to recover after so many years of struggle. He shared his experiences openly, talking about patience, trust, and the importance of working with the land and the animals rather than against them. Many were inspired, seeing that success was not just about money or tools, but about dedication, understanding, and heart. John and the mare continued their daily routines, but each day felt different now. There was a sense of achievement and pride that had been missing for so long. The challenges that once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable because they were no longer faced alone. He had a partner who could think, respond, and act with him. Together they were stronger than either could have been alone. In the evenings, John would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the mare move through the fields. She seemed to glide effortlessly, her muscles strong and her movements confident. He thought about how far they had come together, from a wary, distant horse to a trusted companion, from a struggling rancher to a man filled with hope and purpose. He realized that life's greatest gifts often arrive in unexpected forms, sometimes in the shape of a creature whose eyes seem to understand your soul. The local community began to respect John in a new way. Where once people had whispered about his bad luck, now they admired his resilience and his partnership with the Apache widow. Children would come to see the horse, amazed at her beauty and intelligence. Neighbors would stop by, offering help or advice, and John welcomed them, sharing his knowledge freely. The ranch became a place of learning, growth, and inspiration for everyone who visited. John also felt a sense of gratitude that went deeper than just material success. He was thankful for the storm, for the struggles, and for the long years of work that had prepared him for this moment. Without the hardships, he might never have been ready to understand the value of trust, patience, and partnership. The mare had taught him more than he could have imagined, not just about horses, but about life, perseverance, and hope. As the seasons changed, John and the mare continued to thrive together. The fields turned green with new growth, the cattle became healthier and stronger, and the ranch grew more productive. John no longer worried about the future with fear. Instead, he approached each day with confidence, knowing that he had the skills, the experience, and the partnership to meet any challenge. The land, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed full of promise. In quieter moments, John reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the long years of struggle, the loneliness and the doubts that had filled his nights. And he remembered the day he bought the Apache widow, uncertain and hopeful. That choice had changed everything. She had not only helped him rebuild the ranch, but she had also rebuilt his heart. She had reminded him that life could be full of unexpected joy, and that perseverance, paired with trust, could lead to amazing outcomes. Finally, one evening, John rode the mare across the wide fields of the ranch, the sun low on the horizon. The cattle moved calmly ahead, following the mare's guidance, and the air was filled with the peaceful sounds of life thriving. John felt a deep contentment, knowing that he had found his place in the world once again. The journey had been long, difficult, and full of uncertainty, but it had also been rewarding beyond measure. As the last light of day faded into night, John stopped at the edge of the hill and looked out over the ranch. The Apache widow stood beside him, her head gently nuzzling his shoulder. In that quiet moment, he understood something important. Success was not measured only by wealth or possessions, but by trust, partnership, and the courage to keep going, even when life seemed impossible. Together they had turned hardship into hope, struggle into strength, and loneliness into companionship. The ranch, once a symbol of failure and worry, had become a place of growth, pride, and inspiration. And John knew that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they could not face.